By this section, Congress surrendered its constitutional powers to legislate upon a subject within its exclusive jurisdiction for the period of 20 years, not satisfied with a monopoly of the currency and banking of the country. The unlimited greed of the wealthy stockholders of this bank demanded and secured from Congress a pledge of the public faith that the essential powers of the government should lie dormant for 20 years. In the early days of the Republic, the accursed spirit of special privileges had shorn the nation of its means of self-preservation. For the exclusive powers conferred upon it, the government received in return for this valuable franchise a small annual bonus. It will be ascertained from the enormous powers enjoyed by the bank that it obtained a monopoly of the circulating medium of the country, that, in addition to its capital stock of $35 million, which constituted its primary loanable fund, it would earn interest upon the circulating notes issued by it, as we'll call as usury, upon the government revenues when used in discounts. Therefore, by force of law, the interest-earning capacity of its capital was more than doubled. It was a colossal moneyed monopoly. The bank rapidly obtained a practical control over the business of the nation, and it would tolerate no opposition. By its methods of conferring substantial favors upon the influential journals of the leading commercial cities, and by its loans to powerful members of both branches of Congress, it was enabled to rally to its support a coerced and manufactured public sentiment, far-reaching and widespread as the limits of the Union. The financial power of the bank, under its able and unscrupulous management, had become so dominant in its influence that it deemed itself master of the government and the people. This monopoly believed in the Hamiltonian maxim that a public debt is a public blessing, and during its career as the fiscal agent of the government, threw every obstacle in the way of the payment of the national debt. It may be inquired by some why the bank should oppose the payment of the debt. The reason is obvious. The larger the debt, the more revenues necessary to pay the interest charge thereon, and therefore the more profit to the bank from the use of the increased revenues in making loans and discounts. From 1816 to 1828, it was the sole arbiter of the financial affairs of the nation, both public and private. Its power in politics was immense, and it swayed elections at will. The most eloquent senators and representatives were continually sounding its praises in the halls of Congress as the most perfect financial institution ever devised by the wit of man. Deluded with the idea that it was invincible in its influence, and that it was a necessary part of the machinery of government, it was confident that its charter would be renewed before its expiration by limitation of law. The audacity of the bank was destined to receive a check in its career of uninterrupted power and success, and its astonishing abuses of its franchise were to be mercilessly exposed, and it was doomed to fall never to rise again. In the presidential election of 1828, Andrew Jackson, the hero of New Orleans, was elected chief magistrate by a great majority, and the bank, its defenders and retainers, were fated to run counter to a patriot and statesman of invincible will and unflinching integrity. At the time of this election and prior thereto, the public debt was being reduced rapidly, and it would not be long before the United States would not owe a single dollar. As has been stated, the United States Bank strongly opposed the payment of the debt for the age-aggrandizement of its own selfish purpose. On the 8th day of December 1829, President Jackson, in his first annual message to Congress, announced to that body that he was opposed to the bank and that he would not favor a renewal of its charter. In the year 1830, a large surplus of public revenues accrued to the United States, and according to law, the money was deposited in the bank. This accumulation of revenues served to augment the power of the bank as it increased its resources, and therefore its facility to make additional loans and discounts in the various commercial centers of the country. President Jackson discerned the policy of the bank, and in 1830 he advocated the passage of a law distributing these surplus revenues among the states. He again opposed the renewal of its charter. United States Senator Benton of Missouri, a man of great energy, extensive learning, and commanding ability, thoroughly understood the means by which the bank had obtained its mastery over the commerce and industry of the nation, and therefore, at that session of Congress, he presented a resolution in the United States Senate to the effect that the charter of the bank ought not to be renewed. The resolution was lost by a vote of 23 to 20. The introduction of that resolution and the narrow majority by which it failed of passage sounded a note of warning to the bank, and it gathered all its energies for the struggle that sooner or later was bound to come. To arouse public sentiment in its behalf, It initiated a policy of expanding its loans until they reached the vast total of $71 million, which were so judiciously placed among leading merchants and manufacturers that, in the event of their being called in by the bank, a powerful pressure would be exerted upon the President and Congress by those who were borrowers of the bank. On the 4th of July, 1832, a bill to recharter the bank after its passage by Congress was sent to President Jackson for approval. Many of the influential political friends of the president, aware of his intense hostility toward the bank and its methods, importuned him to sign the bill. Large delegations of leading citizens from every trade center in the country implored him to allow the measure to become a law. Merchants and importers, who were heavy borrowers from the bank, trooped to Washington to add their appeals to the petitions already presented. Its paid hirelings in the halls of Congress and elsewhere predicted dreadful results to business interests should the president not recede from his opposition to the bill continuing the existence of the bank for the period of 20 years longer. To add to the general clamor, the bank, through its officials, avowed its purpose to precipitate a panic and to pull down in ruins the business of the country should its demands not be concealed. It compelled its thousands of borrowers to sign distress petitions, which it caused to be sent to the president as the apparently free expression of public sentiment. The magazine had long been prepared by the bank, the train was laid, and Nicholas Biddle, the president of this great financial institution, sat in his luxurious office and declared himself ready and willing to apply the match that would start the most ruinous financial explosion that had yet shook the foundations of the Republic. Mr. Biddle had most able lieutenants in both branches of Congress devoted to his interest. Daniel Webster, the eloquent orator and great lawyer, Henry Clay, whose persuasive powers were unrivaled, and Calhoun, the great leader of the South, led the banking interest in Congress. In a work entitled Andrew Jackson and the Bank of the United States, William L. Royal thus speaks of the conduct of these three leaders. In addition to all its other sources of power, the cause of the bank received invaluable assistance from the coalition of these great men, Webster, Clay, and Calhoun. Each was an aspirant for the presidency, and upon the bank's cause and paper money, each found a common ground upon which all three could meet and oppose Jack on, the great enemy of both these things. All the movements of the bank were but a repetition, with a change of names and dates, of what had taken place on 1811. On the other hand, the stalwart Benton was a stern opponent of the bank, and he was supported by an able array of statesmen of the first rank. Webster and Clay advocated a liberal construction of the Constitution and were eternally sounding the praises of that instrument as the noblest work of statesmanship, yet, while ascribing to it the most ample powers and authority, they strangely supported the theory that the United States Bank was absolutely necessary to the financial administration of the federal government. Benton was a strict constructionist and asserted that the general government was inherently qualified to transact its financial operations without the aid or assistance of any bank or system of banks. He ably maintained the Jeffersonian principles of government that bank paper should be suppressed. In a speech delivered in the United States Senate, Benton thus truly describes the immense power of the bank over the government and the people. The government itself ceases to be independent. It ceases to be safe when the national currency is at the will of a company. The government can undertake no great enterprise, neither war nor pence, without the consent and cooperation of that company. It cannot count its revenues 6 months ahead without referring to the action of that company, its friendship or its enmity, its concurrence or opposition, to sec how far that company will permit money to be scarce or to be plentiful, how far it will let the money system go on regularly or throw it into disorder, how far it will suit the interest or policy of that company to create a tempest or suffer a calm in the money ocean. The people are not safe when such a company has such a power. The temptation is too great, the opportunity too easy, to put up and put down prices, to make and break fortunes, to bring the whole community upon its knees to the Neptunes who preside over the flux and reflux of paper. All property is at their mercy. The price of real estate, of every growing crop, of every staple article in the market, is at their command. Stocks are their playthings, their gambling theater, on which they gamble daily with as little secrecy and as little morality, and far more mischief to fortunes than common gamblers carry on their operations.